You know, I don't do miniature painting videos very often, maybe only a handful in my entire history. But when you have a chance to paint Demogorgon, you paint Demogorgon. This is a really cool model and a case study in why, if you're not into painting miniatures, I think you should try it. Hey everyone, Wylock here. Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to paint Demogorgon. I guess this was limited to 1500. This model was loaned to me by my neighbor to paint up. He's in my D&D campaign. But I'm going to assume that you've never painted a model before. Alright, so this video may be a little bit tedious at parts for those of you who are familiar with any sort of miniature painting. But just in case, to show you how fun and easy it can be, I think I only spent like 2 hours of actual bench time, excluding dry time, to paint this guy up and get this result. So I'll walk you through how I did it. Let's go paint the model. And remember that our sponsor is Heroes Horde for you 3D printers out there. Excellent selection, including all True Tiles lines. So to begin with, I've already assembled him and spray primed him black. Then I took it outside and with some gray primer, I just sprayed top down to give it a nice zenithal start. This is sometimes called pre-shading, and with the methods we're using, it's not totally necessary, but it will have a subtle effect on the overall result at the end. You'll see. Here it is dry inside under some better lighting. You can see already it's done a lot of shading, and he actually looks pretty cool as is, right? So you can imagine if you paint thinly over this with color, you're going to get a result with some nice depth. And I will be using Vallejo paints throughout this video. And the main scheme is centered around a basic looking green, a light lime looking green, and a bone white. And to the airbrush with that light green, which is Verde Escorpina. I'm using an Iwata HPCS, and there's links in the video description below with all the supplies that I recommend. Mixing the paint to the consistency of whole milk. And you can use just water to water it down, but it helps to have some flow improver. And the key, especially with light colors, is don't try to get one coat coverage. I think I did 2 or 3 passes on the whole body here with this green, and it still only took like 5 minutes, because when you lay it on thin, it dries almost instantly. Here it is a few minutes later, all the coat's done and dry, and you can see nice full coverage, but also it looks slightly shaded, right? So that pre-shading we did coming through just a little bit. Next up, I'm going to do all the fur on the body, and for this I'm going to use a light brown tannish color. And again, don't try to get one coat coverage with an airbrush. As tempting as it may be, don't do it. Also on the tentacles and the tail, at an extreme angle, I spritzed just a very, very light dusting of this tan color. You can see it's really not much at all. And the hope here is that it just adds a little differentiation, brings it a little closer to that olive color that we see on the box. Next up, I loaded up that standard green, I think it's called sick green, and hit the undersides of things, so like the biceps here, the entire torso, underneath the legs, shooting upwards from underneath at the scales. And this is just going to further enhance the depth and the shadows and where the light is coming from. Yeah, so again, that seems subtle and unnecessary, but look at the model now, compared to a moment ago. Really has some depth to it, and we haven't even done any washing or highlighting yet. Now it's finally to a standard good old-fashioned brush to put on this bone white color on the undersides of the tentacles. 2 thin coats is the way to go with these nice model paints, and really with any paint, but especially on miniatures so that you don't clog up details. Dipping the brush in water before you dip it in the paint is an easy way to thin it pretty much the proper amount. You can also add water to your palette ahead of time, but I don't do that. I just have a heavily loaded brush with water, and basically let the mixing happen at the moment it hits the model. I also base coated the teeth and all of his claws down below. Then with an orangey brown sort of color, base coated the tongue. Again, just trying to mimic the box art here. Now I'm at an awkward angle for filming this whole thing, so my techniques aren't always what you should do. Like my hand is kind of turned away from the model awkwardly right now. But you can see I have my pinky finger touching the model. That creates a tremendous amount of stability for your hand. It gives you a lot more control. Whenever you're doing fine detail painting or miniature painting, it's a really good idea to do that. Touch your pinky to the model or to your other pinky if you're holding the model with both hands. Then I took a black and a gray, mixed them up 50-50, and base coated all these little spikes on him. And now it's time to wash. A wash is basically a very thin, pigment-rich mixture. It can be paint that's just watered down, but ideally you have dedicated products like these that are actual pigment-rich inks mixed with various flow improvers. For this guy, I chose to go with Army Painter Soft Tone. It's a brown wash, but it's a very light brown, and I think it'll go well to tie these two main color schemes I have going on, the green and the tan. It'll tie them together really well. So I just slathered this over the entire body, everything. Now a product like this, I generally do not water down. It's already at the consistency that it should be. If it's any thinner, it's not going to give a meaningful deep color in all the nooks and crannies that it sinks into. Also, for a highly vertical model like this, it might run down and pool at the bottom and just bleed off of the model. Now you can see in real time how this just goes right into the details. They suck them up and it really makes the model start to pop. I'm just going to go apply this over the entire thing. Don't be afraid with washes. They dry subtler than they look when they're wet, sometimes by a lot. So it may look really dark now, but wait till it dries. And this will take a good solid hour to dry. So for example, here it is, totally done being washed. I just finished. It's still very wet. We'll get some close-ups. You can see how it's sunk into cracks. It's pooled kind of nicely in places where I want it to, subtly changing the character of those green scales to sort of an olive. But now here it is dry, much subtler, right? Still looks nicely tied together. Unfortunately, this has really revealed that mold line there across his back, which is disappointing. I didn't see that before. Alright, now I need to make an adjustment. I feel that the fur is a little bit bleached out. It's not as vibrant as I would like. I want to add some saturation, so I just figured I would try this reddish brown, dark flesh tone, and mix it with some Army Painter Strong Tone. Mix that equal parts together along with an equal part of water to make a nice rich glaze. And then I just dab that all over the fur, mostly in the central parts, to sort of create a gradient. And again, this is going to be a lot more subtle when it dries. And there we go, much better. Much richer color, which I like. I'm not afraid of colors. I don't think you should be either. I think miniatures should really pop, so even if they don't look realistic, whatever. Color is fun. Let's switch gears a little bit and work on the base. First solid coat with sort of a lighter gray. I don't remember what it was. It was probably a cheap craft paint, actually. 2 thin coats, being patient for dry times between each, and we get a nice, beautiful, smooth matte finish. Here, so I'm going to use some purple tone. This is a wash, and I apply this liberally to all of the stonework. The pillars and the arches and the stuff that he's grabbing onto and the stuff that's busted up on the ground, I just slathered it on there. Again, not watering it down, using it right out of the bottle. Followed by some dark tone. This is just a black wash. And he hit all the rest of the base, everything that wasn't, fallen stone. When applying washes, it's a good idea to use a soft bristled brush with fairly long bristles in a round shape, as opposed to a pointed tip. So take a look at the brush I'm using here. Here's a good look at it wet, nice and beautiful and saturated. And here they are dry. Wonderful. I love these Army Painter washes. Now for some dry brushing. Dry brushing is a technique where you have a dry brush and then you dip it in a bit of paint and then you work the paint right back off onto the palette so there's just a trace amount left on the bristles. Then you strike at the piece lightly at varying angles and let the detail of the model pick the paint off of the bristles for you. Do this lightly. You can always add more, but you can't take it off. So I'm using a light gray here and I'm dry brushing all the stuff that I just shaded, the purple and the ground. And this is a super easy way to highlight a model. Very fast, took about 90 seconds to dry brush the whole base. Also going to return to that original Escorpina green and do some dry brushing on the scales. And notice that the brush, I'm only picking it upwards. I'm not going back downwards. And this is so that only those leading edges of the scales will catch the light green and it won't go over the main surface and certainly not into the cracks that we just shaded. Also back to that original bone white for the underside of the tentacles, and I dry brush those as well. You can see in real time how this highlights the model and brings some life back to it, because washes do tend to dull things down a lot. So no matter what you're doing, at what level you're painting, it's almost always a good idea to do some highlighting after you've washed or shaded. Back to that original gray that I had mixed with the black, and just picking out the tips of all the spikes on his back and his shoulders. Now it's time to do some yellows, and yellow is the worst color to paint with. It doesn't matter what quality, what brand, its coverage is terrible. So it's helpful to lay down white first and then paint yellow over that. So it's back to the airbrush, and I'm going to do that bloom that's in the middle of his chest where the evil is radiating out, or whatever that is, from the box art. I'm also going to stage the eyes and the nostrils with white. Then I'm going to load in this sun yellow color, so it's not a true yellow, it's sort of like a goldenish yellow. And we'll do up the chest, and then the eye sockets, and the nose. By the way, this wouldn't really be possible with a super cheap, $20 airbrush. Those generally cannot draw a fine bead up close like this, and don't have that amount of control. Then it's back to white to hit that bloom in the middle and make it start to glow. And finally, with a reddish-orange sort of color, I painted the eyes, and I used the finest brush I have for this, a Winsor Newton Series 7, I think it's a triple aught. You don't need that, but you need something with a real fine point. Lastly, I'm going to do a nice protective clear coat. This Krylon Crystal Clear Flat, unlike all other matte sealants I've tried, this one actually dries true matte, so I highly recommend it. So hopefully this demonstrates to you the power of an airbrush for doing base coating. It literally reduces the amount of time 99%, not exaggerating. Also, you'll notice I didn't do a single edge highlight or pin recess wash in this entire thing. All I did was the absolute basic introductory level techniques associated with miniature painting to get a pretty good result. This is perfect. I'm running out of the abyss right now. We're halfway through. I expect to start using this model a lot. So what do you think? Did I nail the box art or not? In my mind's eye, I had always pictured Demogorgon as being like black and red, but this is alright. It pops nicely. Another point I'll share is, consider the fur. I did not dry brush the fur. That's because I had a really light color on there for the base coat before I washed. Now the brighter your color is before the wash, obviously the brighter the peaks will be after it dries. We know that washes will dull and darken the current state of the paint, but if the original state of the paint was really bright, well, you can get away without having to highlight it. And if there's one point that I hope you take away from this, it's that triangle of power concept. Use your pinky finger to create stability when you're doing miniature painting. If you enjoy hobbying and crafting for your tabletop gaming, make sure you come and find our community, 30,000 strong on Facebook, the Tabletop Crafters Guild. We'd love to have you. And if you enjoyed this particular video, here's 2 others that I think you'll also like. So I am Wylock, thanks for joining me today. Make things and play games.